The murder of Stephen Cameron, May 19th, 1996, Kent. Stephen Cameron was a 21-year-old electrician. His family say he was loving. He was in a long-term relationship with his fiancée, Danielle Cable. The couple lived in Swanley, Kent with Stephen's parents. They were all very close-knit. But Stephen crossed paths with career criminal Kenneth Noye. Kenneth Noye is a notorious British criminal, and he lived just 10 miles from Stephen. But how did Noye get this reputation? Noye was born in Greater London and left school at 15. He began his criminal activity from that young age. He stole bicycles, modified them, and sold them on for cash. In 1980, Noye became a Freemason, becoming a member of the Hammersmith Lodge, stating his occupation as a builder. But alongside this, he worked as a police informant, working with the most corrupt police officers. When it was found that Noye had a criminal record and didn't pay his fees, his membership was terminated from the Freemasons. He continued being an informant for the police, using his tip-offs to the Met to prevent competition from other gangs. While being a narc and a criminal, he also had a haulage business, most likely to launder his dirty money. But in November 1983, a robbery took place. The Brinkmat robbery was committed at Heathrow's International Trading Estate. It is one of the UK's biggest robberies. They stole 26 million, equivalent to 112 million today. Noye worked as a moving man. He melted down the gold into copper coins and then laundered the gold into his business to get rid of any trace. Noye was being investigated for the robbery and ended up stabbing and killing Detective Constable John Fordham, who was part of the surveillance team. Noye was acquitted on the grounds of self-defence, but was found guilty of conspiracy to handle stolen goods and conspiracy to evade VAT. He was sentenced to 14 years and was released in 1994, having served only 8 years. He lived his life happy-go-lucky, with no shame once on the outside of prison. And just 2 years later, while out on licence, a road rage turned to murder ensued, and this is where Stephen Cameron crossed paths with Kenneth Noye. On the 19th of May, Stephen Cameron and his fiancée Danielle Cable decided to make their way into London to buy some bagels, as he was attending a footy game in the afternoon. Danielle drove the van because Stephen had been out the night before and didn't want to risk driving. Danielle was a new driver, but decided it was better she was to drive, even though she was slightly nervous. The roads were busy as it was a Sunday. Stephen was on the phone to his best mate while they were making their way onto the M25. As Danielle drove onto the motorway, she cut up a Land Rover Discovery. Kenneth Noye was in the Land Rover and was angered by this and got out of his vehicle. Danielle was upset and shocked at the aggression. Stephen got out the van to try and defuse the situation, and that's when Kenneth Noye's road rage started. Kenneth Noye punched Stephen, but Stephen fought back. Noye was being overpowered. Danielle tried to stop other vehicles. Over 30 went past and no one stopped to help her. Noye went back to his car retrieving a knife, stabbing Stephen twice, puncturing his liver and heart fatally. He got back in his Land Rover and sped off while Stephen lay dying in Danielle's arms. Stephen shouted to get his number plate. Danielle quickly rang an ambulance and Stephen's dad. As Stephen's dad approached the scene, it was too late. He was already dead. The senseless murder of Stephen Cameron devastated his entire family and friends circle, along with the wider community. The news hit the whole of the UK. It was unbelievable. Stephen lost his life due to road rage. Kent police launched their biggest investigation. They had 30 witnesses who had used the motorway, as well as the main witness, Danielle. She told the police a description of the car and what happened. Of all the witnesses, no one remembered the whole number plate. Kent police knew what happened. They had lots of witnesses, but they had no idea who the murderer was. They checked the CCTV on the junction, but on the 19th of May, it wasn't working. The only thing Kent police knew was that the murderer was driving a Land Rover Discovery, but they hit their next problem. Witnesses had stated the car was 5 different colours, so who was this M25 killer? The family started to put pressure on the police to solve Stephen's murder, as well as it hitting the press in a massive motion. Danielle was called down into the police station consistently for her statements. She was only 17 years old. To see your fiancé die in your arms and be able to be so helpful to the police was incredibly brave and so significant to the investigation. Information came into the Kent police about local criminal Kenneth Noye, who drove a Land Rover Discovery. But he's disappeared. No one had seen him for a while, which was unlike Kenneth. On the day Stephen Cameron was murdered, Noye made a lot of calls, packed a suitcase with money and fled within 24 hours. His mobile phone record showed it went dead within a day. The police searched Noye's house as well as questioned his friends and family, but they said he was innocent and merely just a missing person. They gave the police nothing. The police soon found that Noye was shipped off in a helicopter out of the UK. And the Land Rover he drove disappeared. On his drive was another Land Rover he bought for cash. Presumably he did this with the intent to make it appear like he was in his house, as well as getting rid of evidence. The British media caught wind that the prime suspect had disappeared, and they ran lots of stories to find him, which helped the case ultimately, but there were doubts that it wouldn't be a fair trial. The Kent police didn't want it plastered everywhere. Reported sightings started coming in from all over the world. The police had sightings of him in Russia to Brazil and anywhere in between. But 2 years after Stephen Cameron's murder, the Kent police got a phone call that Kenneth Noye was living in Spain. He had changed his name and lived in a very remote house. He would only go out drinking in local bars and did nothing other than that. The problem Kent police had is, as soon as officers were sent to Spain to find Noye, the press would find out. So they did this as a private inquiry. Noye had murdered Detective Constable John Fordham, who was previously doing surveillance on him, so this made the Kent police also very nervous. The Kent police followed this lead and tracked Kenneth down to a bar in Spain and confirmed it was him. They then had to focus on bringing him back to the UK to get justice. They needed to link him, so they asked Danielle to go to Spain and identify him, and she did. She positively identified Kenneth as the killer of her fiancé, Stephen Cameron. They went to a restaurant, and that's where she saw him through the window. The Kent police got a warrant, and the Spanish authorities were briefed on how aggressive he can be towards officers. He was very quickly taken into custody and arrested at the bar in Spain. After a year, Noye was extradited to the UK. He said at first he had nothing to do with the murder of Stephen Cameron and knew nothing about it. He said that the British police wanted him because he was acquitted for killing one of their boys in blue. He then had a change of heart and said Stephen attacked him and it was self-defence. Kenneth Noye went to trial and pleaded not guilty. Noye said he believed he had to leave the country because the police would make sure he got done for the murder, because he murdered one of their own, Detective Constable John Fordham. He said Stephen was the violent person. He felt that Stephen was going to kill him, but Danielle's witness statement was the most important piece of evidence, and he was sentenced to life in prison, with the minimum term being 16 years before consideration of parole. This was a bitter pill to swallow. He only got 16 years. The family believed a life should mean life. Stephen only got slight justice. Noye could walk free after 16 years, and Stephen never will again. After the trial, Danielle Cable's identity was changed for her own safety. The biggest pill to swallow, that today Kenneth Noye is free. After serving only 20 years for the murder of Stephen Cameron, he was granted release from the parole board. They concluded any risks could be dealt with in the community and he was otherwise safe to be released. Thanks for watching. Until next time.